The Speaking Statements, the podcast of statements about the 50 U.S. states. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for alerts for when a new episode is released.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to our newest episode of Season 5 from the Speaking Statements. We have a guest here to talk about Maine. I want to introduce Marty Topol, who lives in Maine right now, to talk about Maine today. Hi, Marty.
Hi, Julian. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
It's a pleasure. I have some questions about Maine.
I'm happy to talk about Maine.
My first question is, what do you like about Maine and why?
Good question. What I like about Maine is, one, I have a lot of family that lives in Maine, so it's fun to be close to family and be able to see them. And two, I think that Maine is a fun state to live in because there are a lot of different outdoor activities that you can enjoy. Maine has a lot of ocean coastline. Maine has beautiful lakes. Maine has a lot of woods that you can go on hikes in, and also has mountains that you can go skiing in. And it doesn't take very long to get to the lakes or to the mountains or to the ocean. So there's a lot of fun things to do in Maine. And another reason that I like living in Maine is I think we get to experience four distinct seasons in Maine. So you have a nice winter time where there's usually snow. You have a really good summertime. Fall is great in Maine. You have very pretty leaves here, and a lot of people come travel to Maine in the fall to look at leaves. And in the spring, it's very pretty as well when that long winter is over and you start getting some warmer weather again. So there are different reasons why I like Maine, but I think those are probably the big ones for me.
Yeah. My second question is, what kind of foods are popular in Maine?
Oh, good question. Okay, so Maine is actually pretty famous for a number of different foods. Probably the most famous is lobster. I don't know if you have ever eaten lobster before.
No, but I do know Maine is known for it a lot.
Maine is really known for its lobster, and you can get Maine lobster in a lot of the big fancy restaurants in Chicago. They ship it over there. Another food that Maine is very famous for are blueberries. Maine has a lot of wild blueberries, which have a smaller berry than most other blueberries. And Maine has massive, massive blueberry fields in kind of the northern part of the state. And so we actually produce quite a lot of blueberries that get sent all around the country to your grocery store. And then let's see, don't tell people from Idaho, but Maine is also pretty well known for potato farming. We grow a lot of potatoes in Maine, and I personally prefer the Maine potato flavor to the Idaho potato flavor. But I understand that that could be a big rivalry with people from Idaho.
Yeah, we have done Idaho.
Okay, good. Well, I'm sure you heard about Idaho potatoes, but a secret is that Maine potatoes are better, but don't tell anyone.
All right. I'll keep those two opinions. My third question is, what do Maine and Canada have in common?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that's kind of hard because Canada as a whole country is so much bigger than Maine. But certainly Maine and Canada are next to each other, part of Canada. So we have a lot in common culturally. People from the Canadian province of Quebec travel to Maine for vacation quite frequently. So there are a lot of people that live in Canada that have vacation houses in Maine, and they come down to Maine in the summertime for their vacations. But we have been neighbors for a long, long time, obviously. And so I think that Maine and Canada have a lot in common in terms of cultural history, and we're in the same part of the country. So, we have a lot of similar food and similar agriculture, and the weather is pretty similar. So I think there are a lot that's the same, but Canada is such a big country that I'm sure that once you get away from the eastern part of Canada, then it's very different. One thing they have in common, I should have mentioned this when you asked me about foods. Another thing that Maine and also Canada are known for is having maple syrup. And there's a lot of maple trees in both Maine and Canada. And so the Canadians are very proud of their maple syrup. And then, of course, people that live in Maine are very proud of Maine made maple syrup.
Yeah, we haven't done this episode yet, but maple syrup was also known not just for Maine, but for New Hampshire as well. And Canada's symbol is the maple leaf.
Canada's symbol is the maple leaf. Maine does not have a nice leaf symbol like Canada. And when you do Vermont, I know that people that live in Vermont are also very proud of maple syrup. So in New England, there's a lot of maple syrup.
Yeah, I think actually Vermont, I think is one of the main producers.
I believe that's right.
for
But I
Maine.
know that we also have a lot of it here. So that, to answer your question, is another big thing that Canada and Maine have in common. And
Yeah.
Canada and Maine also do a lot of fishing together in the Atlantic Ocean, the northern Atlantic. There are certain parts of it that are for Canadian fishermen, and there are certain parts of it that are for Maine fishermen. And there are longstanding treaties that go back a long time that divide up where the boats can go.
Yeah, that was a good one. My fourth question is, what are popular activities in Maine?
Oh, that's a great question. And it depends on the season. And we talked about this. I think Maine has 4 distinct seasons. So in the summer, there is a lot that you can do in the ocean, whether you're going boating or ocean fishing, or people go surfing, or they have ocean kayaks. There's a lot of water activities. And also on the lakes in Maine, people like to go to the lakes and fish or have a canoe or a kayak or a power boat. So there's a lot of that. A lot of life in Maine revolves around the sea. And then in the wintertime, because we have mountains that have nice ski areas, a lot of people in Maine enjoy going skiing, or they'll go snowmobiling on trails, or even ice fishing, which is fun. You go out on a frozen lake and you drill a hole in the ice and you fish through a hole in the ice for fish.
Yeah, that was a really good answer. I didn't know all that. My fifth question is, what are some slightly odd facts about Maine?
Here is a good, slightly odd fact. Until 1820, Maine was a part of Massachusetts. And so it wasn't until 1820 that Maine split off and became its own distinct state. But before that, it was technically a part of Massachusetts.
Yeah, so right after Alabama became a state.
Well, you know more about that than I do. What I remember is in 1820 there was this thing called the Missouri Compromise, and it had to do with the lead up to the Civil War. Congress got together and allowed Maine to become a state, and then right after that, Missouri became a state.
Do you in Maine want to be different than Massachusetts, really?
Oh, yes, sir. People in Maine like being Mainers. Everybody was very happy. So, Julian, another interesting fact about the state of Maine is that Maine has some big shipyards where they build warships for the U.S. Navy. And they've been doing that in Maine for a long time, and they still have an active naval shipyard.
Wow, that's really cool. My sixth and last question is, if someone new came to Maine, what would you recommend?
Well, I would recommend that they have a very nice lobster roll as one of the first things that they do, because Maine, as we talked about, is really known for lobster. But then I would say the people in Maine are very friendly. So as a tourist, no matter what time of the year you come here, you'll be able to go out into the outdoors and really do whatever you'd like to do, whether it's hiking in the mountains or going to the beach in the summertime, or driving along and looking at. Maine has a number of very famous lighthouses that are very picturesque, that are right on the ocean, that are very pretty. So I think it's any time of year is a good time to come to Maine and try some of those foods that we talked about that Maine is famous for, and really just enjoy being in the outdoors, because Maine is a very outdoorsy state.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good answer. Well, I'm done with my questions. We are glad to have you here to talk about Maine.
And thank you for having me once again. I really enjoyed your questions.
Bye.
Bye.
And now for my notes. Maine is the pine tree state. The capital is Augusta, and the biggest city is Portland. The abbreviation is ME. Maine only borders one state, that'd be New Hampshire. It also borders the Atlantic Ocean and a bit of Canada. Moose, black bears, and bobcats, white-tailed deer, and Canada lynx are found in Maine. Birds include bald and golden eagles, ospreys, great gray owls, and roseate terns. Reptiles found in Maine include northern red-belly snakes, smooth green snake, and eastern garter snakes. A famous person born in Maine is Stephen King, who's an author. People in Maine call themselves Mainers. Now to the fast facts of Leo. Give it a go, Leo. What did the state tree? It's the white pine. What is the state flower? There's actually two. One is the white pine cone, and the other is the tassel, which is actually not a kind of flower, really. They just call it the same flower. It's really a pine cone. What is the state bird? It's the black-capped chickadee. What is the state animal? It's the moose. What is the state insect? The state insect is the honeybee. What is the state soft kink? It's moxie. What is the state berry? It's the wild blueberry. What is the state cheat? That would be a whoopie pie. We actually made them today, right, Leo? Yeah. What is the state fish? It's the landlocked salmon. What is the state dessert? Blueberry pie. What is the state butterfly? It's the pink-edged sulfur. And thanks for doing the fast facts with us, Leo. I don't want to be on your podcast. I love to be on your podcast. Bye, Leo. Bye. And last but not least, we have the Maine Quarter, which is a lighthouse on a hill with a sailing ship or ships in the distance. That's all for today, but check in next week for our middle episode of Season 5. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Speaking Statements.